It is now 3:30 and we will begin our session on unlocking COVID-19, current realities, future opportunities. This is the fourth session in a series every fortnight up until the 2nd of September. And today's topic will be focusing on community leadership in times of crisis. So my name is Belisa Rodriguez. I am the program manager of the Klaus-Jürgen Barter Leadership Program, which is a scholarship based at the University of Cape Town. And this particular webinar series is a huge collaborative effect, really, between the Department of Alumni Relations at the University of Cape Town, plus the Extramural Studies Department as part of the summer school series, together with the Klaus-Jürgen Barter Leadership Program and sponsored by Nedbank. So really a collaborative effort for this particular webinar. And just a little bit of background to the Klaus-Jürgen Barter Leadership Program. Klaus-Jürgen Barter, Professor Klaus-Jürgen Barter himself is an alumni of the University of Cape Town. So very appropriate for us today to be hosting something of this nature, which is speaking to potentially hundreds of alumni in the audience. The Klaus-Jürgen Barter Leadership Program was established at the University of Cape Town in 2014 through a gift donated by Professor Klaus-Jürgen Barter of Massachusetts of the USA. And the primary goal of the program is to produce graduates with outstanding leadership qualities and a strong sense of social justice, who will go on to play leading and significant roles in business, government, industry, and civil society in South Africa and across the continent. And there are many leadership programs in South Africa and elsewhere, but this one specifically aims to find, educate, and nurture talented undergraduate students towards becoming leaders who are able to tackle issues at a national level and uplift their communities. And so the Klaus-Jürgen Barter Leadership Scholarship is offered to promising students enrolled in full-time undergraduate studies at UCT for a period of 2 years. And I'm hoping that there are alumni in the audience today who will be offering some questions around leadership issues. And so without much further ado, I'd like to introduce the order of events. Myself as the host, I'll be handing over to a moderator or MC, and just a brief introduction to the MC is Lorenzo Davids. Lorenzo Davids is the CEO of Community Chest. He's also a columnist for the Cape Argus, and his column title is Change the Story. He's also at the University of Cape Town Graduate School doing his MPhil in Social Innovation, so a current student. He's a consultant to the University of Stockholm's Resilience Center's Transforming Change program and has a platitude of other accolades against his name and is well known in South Africa. So I thank Lorenzo for being the moderator today. And then with him, we are joined by 3 of my peers, young leaders themselves. And just to briefly introduce them and to welcome them, we have Tariq Jenkins, who is based in Cape Town, South Africa. He's an accredited South African Human Rights Commission monitor, reporting on violations during COVID-19 during this time. So should have interesting stories on the ground to tell us. He also holds an MFA from Columbia University and is an alumnus of Columbia School of International Public Affairs. He is the chair of the Clara Restorative Justice Forum, based at the Center of African Studies at the University of Cape Town. And he's the High Commissioner of the Godingaikona Khoikhoi Indigenous Traditional Council. He's also chair of various civic organizations in Observatory, or past chair. So that's Tariq, who will take us through a Cape Town and South African perspective on community leadership. And then we have Salam Kebede. She leads work in a VC tech early stage tech VC and startup generator called Antler. She's normally based in Ethiopia, but is currently in lockdown in Kenya. Before joining Antler, she worked as a tech startup scout for an investment firm. She's been a business development consultant for various initiatives and a country manager for a business scale accelerator across a total of 3 continents and more than 20 countries. She holds a BSc degree in electrical engineering and an MS degree in communication engineering from Aalto University, Finland. She's also a Mandela Washington Fellow alumni of 2016. She's part of Ethiopian COVID-19 response task force, which she'll be speaking on today, which is a fully volunteer-based group of professionals from across the globe. And she's passionate about tech, coffee, and Africa. And then joining us from Zimbabwe, Bulawayo, is Nkosana Mazibisa. Also happens to be a Mandela Washington Fellow, so peers in the real sense of the word. He's an international award-winning social entrepreneur. He's also a recent author and a community leader. He's the founder of Mat Live, a community-based business incubation center, and I think he's currently sitting in his center. He is the information secretary in the office of the Member of Parliament for Njube Lobengula in Zimbabwe. In 2019, he was chosen together with 10 young people to conceptualize, plan, and execute the inaugural National Youth Indaba, which was held in Harare. He's also the chairman of a local primary school, and he's running a number of programs on the ground for food relief and PPE for hospitals and other centers to tackle COVID. So I think that is all from me in terms of introducing everybody who's going to be speaking today. At the end of the webinar, we will also introduce Ashrini, or Ash, as she'd like to be called, from Nedbank, where we will give Nedbank the floor for a presentation towards the end, and I will introduce her then. So I think we're slightly early, which is great. I'd like to hand over to Lorenzo to take us through a conversation with the 3 panelists. Take it away, Lorenzo.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. Thank you, Belisa. Thank you for the introductions. And to the panelists, welcome to this dialogue, this conversation we're going to be having around what does community leadership look like post-COVID-19? And to our audience, those online who have joined us, thank you for being with us today. We look forward to engaging with you through your questions and through the responses that the panelists will give us. So this is about a conversation that we are having with ourselves today around what has happened to communities post-COVID-19? What has happened on the ground? What have you learned? What have you seen? What are the messages you've picked up? And in particular, what does it look like in terms of community agency, individual agency, the autonomy that people bring into the space? We are now some 94 days in lockdown in South Africa. In other parts of the continent like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Zim, those numbers may differ, but it's somewhere around the 100-day figure. Normally people assess what has happened to a community after 100 days under new leadership. The question I want to pose to you this afternoon is, what has happened to communities across the African continent after a 100-day lockdown? What have you seen emerge? What are the struggles? What are the victories? What are the resiliences you've seen? What are the conversations that you've listened in on? What are the rights practices that you've seen that have been good or bad? What has happened to industry and communities' responses to industry in the post-COVID-19 experience? So tell us what you've seen about agency, what you've seen about autonomy. Tell us what you've seen about the world in which we live and how communities have survived or struggled to survive within this post-lockdown period that we're in now. And I'm going to go to Salima first. I want to just hear your journeys around both the contextual realities of where you are now, but also reflection perhaps on Ethiopia. And then in particular also how you see that from a business point of view and how communities engage with the world that is now so drastically changed around them. So please, you're going to take us down a conversation for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the questions, Lorenzo and Belisa, for the intro. I'm so happy to be here. A lot happened. When you say 94 days or 100 days, I thought it was 3 years. So it really did feel much longer than that because things have been moving left and right in a crazy speed. But I'll have a few reflections on maybe like the day we found out officially when it was announced, the first case was announced in Ethiopia, and I was in Kenya that day. And it was very strange, right? No one knew what was going to happen, and you have this feel of like, okay, what can I do? How can I help? But you really don't know, and no one seems to know what to do. And it was on Twitter. It was a person called Mike. He posted on Twitter saying, how could we help? How could the tech community, the software engineers, the developers, is there any way we can help? And then he messaged I guess the Minister of Health of Ethiopia or something. And then people started commenting, yeah, I can help. Like, can we create a group, or what should we do? We don't, like, everyone just seemed very interested. And then I saw that post maybe on a Thursday. And then 2 days later, I saw it again, but then with a lot of people liking it and being shared. And there's now a whole like Slack group that was created. There was a sign up form. Everything has been, kind of being made. And I joined the Slack group, and over the weekend, it already had 300 plus people from literally all over the world, all Ethiopians from different walks of life, mainly from the tech backgrounds. And expertise that I never even imagined that we had in our local Ethiopian community. People joining from Iceland and Bermuda, like just random places that you never thought, but asking, I'm a so-and-so engineer, I built this product, or I work for this company, how can I help? So it was such like a bizarre but yet beautiful experience to just watch all of us kind of jumping in, trying to support, especially from the tech perspective. A lot of people really are sidelined, or if your country is not super advanced in technology, you feel like you don't really have any room for you to contribute. But literally, that community was the most self-organizing, the most efficient community I've ever seen. And none of us have met before, yet we had that one agenda, like how can we help our country? And the conversations were alive, like everyone was super, super resourceful. Things were moving super fast. Fast forward to today, I just checked right before the call, actually, there are 1,755 members from all over the world. The Slack group is still busy, still coming up with new ideas. The business, the project ideas have gone from, I think last I checked, it was about around 11 project ideas, say from the most basic dashboard to track the number of cases, to actually working with healthcare workers in the ground or manufacturers on the ground to try and help different ways of more innovative ways to build PPPs, or to do the ventilators, or just trying to be resourceful and help the people on the ground in coordinating efforts. And it's just been such a wonderful experience to see and to know that there is like a lot of people want to help, and then to see the self-starting leadership coming from someone sitting in Washington, D.C., to me in Nairobi, to somebody else in Stockholm, and just all of us working together. And throughout the process, also having met colleagues from high school that are now lawyers in San Francisco, asking, okay, how can we help? And is there anything like we can do to draft an MOU for potential partnerships with other partners that could then help the country? And it's just been fascinating to see and to be part of, to say the least. And that has also trickled down. This is the online kind of the tech community that has been supporting. That also translated into media to create, messaging for the community back home in 9 different languages, all volunteers trying to come up with the strategy, and then putting together the assets, and then translating it to a local language, and sharing it, giving it to the Ministry of Health, so that they don't have to do this, and we can help them even though we're not there personally. So it's just been wonderful, to say the least.
This has been a real conversation that people were having with each other about helping out, and what is that translated into? What does it look like on the ground now? So yes, there's 1,755 people. What does it look like on the ground?
So like I said, there were about 11 projects that came out of this. Wow. So from shipping chatbots in different local languages that could give you instant information about COVID-19, and then the back end has been done by these techies, and we shipped it back, we gave it to the government, or messagings for media so that could be advertised. across social media channels or TV or radio. And then, I mean, some of the videos have been developed by, like, one guy's like, oh, I'm a head of National Geographic, one of the teams that do that. And he's like, I'm happy to do this for free, and then when I say this is not small stuff, these are professional world-class outputs that we were able to put together and then give it to the respective stakeholders that needed them the most. And there's an ongoing project to work on manufacturing as well. So from basic like masks to ventilators, and to try and see, is there an innovative way to make this using local resources? There's a whole research team doing that, group of engineers trying to come up with a recommendation so that the local, whoever's on the ground helping us coordinate, also hands that over to efforts like we had one drive for clothing and clothes, shoes, and food and whatnot. So we put together a drive, and then we had given that to people in the quarantine centers and other people who were not able to, afford to be out there in this trying time. So we also organized that. And then this also triggered a lot of other local communities, so the ones that are physically in Ethiopia, to also do the same. So there you see a lot of social drives, either for food or putting together money and then giving it to people who can't afford to go out and do shopping and eat right now, or different aspects. But the deliveries have been done and are continuing to be done. And the biggest thing that came out of it is also this COVID response toolkit, because the group has also put together a toolkit, and the idea was to take it all continental. So now it's turned into from Ethio COVID response toolkit to become Africa COVID response toolkit, and trying to find potential partners saying you can take this, because we put together this, the boats, the coding, like everything has been done, and all these projects that we think are going to be helpful for any country that's going through this. If there is anyone who wants to take this and use it, we're happy to have that. So Mike, the guy who started it, and other people, there are a lot of people, like I said, leading this, are actively looking for partners across the continent to try and hand this over so other people could also use that.
So let me come in and ask you the question around, so government and the tech industry, or government and business, sort of collaborate, and there's this energy that comes out of this. Have you seen that there are startups that could connect to what has come out of those conversations? What has happened on the ground with startups, and how have they sort of plugged into the energy that was generated from this initial government to business talk?
Right. So I'm so happy you asked that question, because that's my favorite topic. And so normally Ethiopia is not the most advanced country when it comes to startups and tech, especially because there are a lot of issues, infrastructure, policies, tech adoption, a few things. There are a lot of things on place that prevented us from moving as fast as we could have gone. However, the moment the lockdown happened, and it was really, so I was so happy to see that. We had one or two, I think, delivery companies. Now there are 20 plus in the past, in the past 3 months. Fintech, mobile payments, payment online in general has been so difficult to do. We didn't have the means, we didn't have the policies that allowed for it, we didn't have the infrastructure for it, we didn't have the adoption for it. And all of a sudden now the fintech policy has been approved, and there are a ton of local startups that are now providing mobile money or online transaction access. So they haven't really started yet, but that initiative, at least the first phase, the biggest challenge has now been lifted. We now, last week, I saw we have a digital Ethiopia policy or something that came out, a completely a whole policy to guide the country to go digital. And this will happen in a few months. And when you look at it, we've moved faster in the past 3 months when it comes to tech adoption and digital transformation than we did in the past 10 years. Wow. And this is a dream for us, because my full-time job is building tech startups and looking for brilliant people to come together to build these tech startups with us so we can invest in them. And it has been impossible to do so in Ethiopia. That's why our company is now in Kenya, but seeing how fast things are able to move, and we've seen right now that there is a potential, I'm very excited to see how COVID has unlocked that part of the country.
So as we come to wrapping this up with you, give us your sense of what is the message that you think lands at this point for you around community leadership. What has happened post COVID-19, and you have about 30 seconds to wrap this up.
Right.
What's the message that you got?
The message I got is I think there is potential, like, so people want to help, and it's all about self-organization and knowing that if you want to do something, you should just go ahead and do it, and then other people would follow, because chances are you're not the only person wanting to do that. If Mike didn't, ask for that help, none of us would be there. But we were all thinking about, like, how can I help, right? So that was the biggest learning for me from this past 3 months. And then the second thing is, it is possible to transform things and move things forward, even through a pandemic, when things are necessary to change. So I'm so happy to have seen that happen in Ethiopia and most places in the continent as well.
Thank you. Those are very powerful insights. I appreciate that, Salam, and thank you for sharing that story with us. And I hope that we're going to bump into these toolkits all across the continent. And so thank you for your introductions and sharing today. We're going to go to Nkosana in Zimbabwe, and a similar question to you, reflecting on what you have found in terms of, has COVID-19 shown a deepening of community leadership? Has it shown that there's a greater resilience? Has it shown that there's a greater sense of autonomy that has emerged? Or have people become demoralized? Have they become splintered? Have they become angry about what has happened to them? What's your sense of the effects that it's had on local communities and their responses to the challenges of living under a lockdown system? What are the narratives you've seen? What are the voices you've heard? What are the stories that you've read?
Yes, first and foremost, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be in this discussion, which is very informative, especially if it's led by young people. I'm very passionate when I see young people taking the forefront in crisis management and in crisis leadership. One thing for a fact is that COVID-19 has exposed the vulnerabilities in our socio-economic and cultural structures. That is a fact. Every change ushers in unforeseen circumstances. And in this typical space we're in terms of COVID-19, we are very much aware that our government, particularly in Zimbabwe, if you bear in mind, it's thought that COVID, it's one disease, or it's one crisis that can only be felt in the Western countries. That is why one of our ministers came out on TV to put out a propaganda statement saying, we thank God for COVID-19 because it is a way of punishing the West, unaware that karma is a way of turning around. Then COVID hit Zimbabwe. So when COVID hit Zimbabwe, we were very much aware that our government has been failing for the past 20 years in providing service delivery and also in having proper health systems in place. So COVID-19 has exposed all those and leading to a rise in community respondents and a rise in urban poverty and poor service delivery. So once there is a crisis, that is when you realize that there is a need for genuine leadership, what we usually refer to ethical leadership. So that is when young people stepped in, and we also came together through what you call for Bulawayo Fighting COVID-19, which is a global response to COVID-19 in Zimbabwe, made up of many stakeholders, right from business to entrepreneurs, also to church leaders and also to civic organizations. We came together under that banner with the same perspective to say, if we do not step in, government won't do anything for us. I'm glad to say that we put ourselves into different thematic areas, including the biomedicals, where we identified health facilities like Joshua Nkomo Private Hospital, which has been a shell for the past 23 years. So we have resuscitated that, mobilizing resources such as PPE and also drilling of boreholes, because water is critical in fighting COVID-19. For people to continuously wash hands, they need to have running and available water. But in Bulawayo, we have a crisis since 1917 because of the water crisis. So we have managed to drill borehole in one of those areas, and also to source donations in terms of PPE, cleaning material, and bedding. I'm happy that one of the members of the royal family donated blankets as we're moving into the cold season. In our quarantine centers, remember, these quarantine centers are run by government, which is very ineffective. So without young people being involved in mobilizing resources, that will just become a pandemic, a full-blown pandemic. And also, remember, Zimbabwe is in a bad shape in terms of economics. So once you declare lockdown, you are literally blocking people from transacting, you're literally blocking people from earning livelihoods. So much of our people and much of our households do not have sustainable incomes. So during lockdown, that is when we came up with food relief programs from for Bulawayo and also from Madlife Business Incubation Center. The incubation center is located within the townships, where we have an interface with first-hand information regarding vulnerabilities. So we came up with food aid relief programs. Under for Bulawayo fighting COVID, we have managed to reach close to 1,200 households in terms of distributing food hampers to make sure that throughout this crisis, households are sustained and we close the gap between those who can afford and those that can't afford. Then under Madlife Business Incubation Center, for the past 3 months, we have been running that, touching 60 households a month within communities, because we cannot fight COVID-19 without sustaining livelihoods. And also, there is one thing that I've learned during this whole crisis is, in the 21st century, the power to share an idea is as powerful as conceiving it. You know, you may have the best social cause, the best idea, but if you can't share it with others and harness the social circles, that idea becomes fruitless. So being aware of that, I come from Bulawayo, which is more of a cosmopolitan city with all the languages you can think of in Zimbabwe. That is the way they are. So for us to fight COVID-19, we have to make sure that all languages are catered for in terms of information dissemination, in terms of content, in terms of context as well. For us to fight COVID-19, we will need everyone to be on board. Once you say this cause is for the elite, most likely we are going to realize we are going to have a quite number of infections, a quite number of rise in terms of infections. So we made sure that in terms of information dissemination, we localize it, we put it into local content and context. That leads to clarity and information awareness. Then also moving forward, we saw a rise in corruption as well. People were donating. The first 4 weeks, people were donating to the central government. As they're donating to central government, for the past 2 weeks, there's been a scandal that has been unearthed, which is called COVID-19 gate scandal in Zimbabwe, where people related to the first family, to the sitting president, were abusing state resources and donations, and they're being awarded tenders, where you find PPE, which cost 28 cents, has been inflated to $28. So instead of government coming on board to collectively assist in fighting COVID-19, we have people who are abusing state resources to enrich themselves during this pandemic. So that tells you a lot that during COVID-19, we have people who have different agenda. We have those that are genuine in sustaining and fighting COVID-19. And then there are those who are finding an opportunity to enrich themselves. So COVID-19 is exposing all those. Unfortunate for us, Zimbabwe, we have been in that position for the past 23 years, where we're thinking maybe because of COVID-19, some people might have a sense of, of repentance or a sense of coming home to say, no, we have got a pandemic. Let's fight it together. And the other painful part is where we are in Zimbabwe. Much of our leaders were used to traveling abroad in terms of accessing quality healthcare in terms of medicine and stuff like that. But because of COVID-19, there was a total lockdown in terms of air traveling. So they were forced to look within themselves in Zimbabwe. Unfortunately, again, we saw a rise in number of private hospitals that were catering for the ruling elite. So the masses ended up saying, if those private hospitals are going to be opened up, we are going to storm them to make sure that we are also catered for. So for me, COVID-19 is exposing quite a number of things. The rise of citizen participation and also a rise of ethical leadership at the forefront of fighting COVID.
I want to come in and just ask you, I want to ask you this question, particularly about young people in the community. How has government responded to this formation of young people in Bulawayo who've taken responsibility for their leadership and for their context? Has government responded to that in any particular way, negative or positive?
I'm happy that it has responded positively because it is incapacitated. We are the ones we have the capacity to deliver. So whatever paperwork we need in terms of clearance, government has made sure that we have the clearance. Why? It's because at the end of the day, they are the ones who are going to check the glory, and it appears if they have done service delivery. But nevertheless, we don't care about who takes the glory at the end of the day. What we care most is service delivery and sustainable households during COVID-19. And because of COVID-19, we're seeing a rise in terms of conscious movements among young people. One saying, if we don't do this thing for ourselves, no one's going to do that for us. And also, in terms of COVID-19, I'm happy. I'm part of the young people who are involved in TIPA, which is called Tackling Infectious Diseases for the Benefit of Africa. Last week, we did almost 700 tests across healthcare centers. Frontline health workers are at the most vulnerable point in terms of infections. So being aware of that, we made sure that we come up with partnerships in terms of TIPA and the government of Zimbabwe, coming up with research and recommendations to make sure that the frontline workers, they are tested. The government does not have the resources to do that. Hence, our lockdown is indefinite. We don't know when it's going to end. The president keeps on saying it's indefinite, and is also taking advantage of the lockdown to hammer the opposition. You know, this is where we are in Africa. When there is an opportunity, you strike.
I'm very encouraged by that story and the sense of community mobilization and people's activism under the virus. Instead of falling apart, people have rallied to become activists. What is your closing message? Just what's the great lesson? I mean, you mentioned some of them, the power of an idea. Is there a message that you're taking away out of COVID-19?
My message.
You got 30 seconds.
Yes, from COVID-19 is that until and unless we close gaps, and we won't win this war. And also, leadership is about influence, not position. Be a sphere of influence where you are and make a change.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments and certainly interesting stories. And I hope that during the question time, we'll come back to some of those initiatives that you've initiated within your own context. Tariq Jenkins is a scholar. He is an indigenous leader. He's a human rights activist. He has monitored situations across at least the Western Cape and elsewhere to defend the rights of people, both indigenous rights and also the essential human rights as sanctioned by the United Nations. Tariq, you've observed many instances across the last 100 days or so around human rights, especially. And I'd like your reflections on what have you seen, what have you heard? How do you think communities are emerging slowly out of this kind of lockdown phase? What are the lessons you've picked up? What are the crises you've seen? And also, perhaps in your case, what have you seen gone wrong? What have you seen has really been an awful indicator of a pathway we should not be pursuing? But how have you seen community leadership play itself out over the last 100 days?
Well, thank you very much, Lorenzo, for that extraordinary question, and thank you so much for everyone. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I think to begin, just in terms of listening to our colleagues, from the rest of the continent, before we started, you gave us the a task almost to begin to reflect how we sort of can personally engage some of these broader questions. And I remember writing a letter on the 24th of March to colleagues of mine in Turkey, basically saying that, we're about to enter lockdown, and we're one of those few countries where we are entering into a full lockdown without a single casualty. And I remember saying that, that one person hasn't dropped yet. Our hospitals are filling in with patients, but there hasn't been a mortality. Right now, Lorenzo, we look at the stats, and the Western Cape is the epicenter of COVID in the country. We've got 53,512 cases, and second comes, Johannesburg, Gauteng with 24,000. And so I think in terms of what would have been the initial questions and fears coming in from civil society, and also from a perspective of our history, is that, it's not unpeculiar that we sort of share this experience of how, we have seen a decimation of traditional indigenous groups across the world by the introduction of diseases. And, with the advent of COVID, what kind of complex aspects of this unsavory narrative we have in Africa that deals with, race science, that deals with the trauma of transgenerational trauma and education, and in particular in our context, apartheid spatial planning. And so while we enjoyed and almost relished in the early stages these kinds of narrow and smaller statistics, I think everyone was very aware of the fact that the kind of spatial framework in which we live, especially within the high density areas across the country, that we were sitting in a kind of a matchbox dynamite explosive situation. And so the question was, how was government going to respond to this? And both you and I, Lorenzo, were on site, monitoring for the South African Human Rights Commission just at the beginning stages of the advent of Cyril Ramaphosa's announcement. And it would appear that there was a conflation in terms of the interpretation of what is a national disaster to what was a state of emergency. And the deployment of the military and the deployment of law enforcement and police across the country certainly responded in a particular kind of way that evoked not only a kind of memory, but re-imbibed a particular sort of experience of a place that we as a country have spent the last, since 1994 trying to move away from. So how then would civil society have to deal with this? And under lockdown 5, it meant that civil society and watchdog human rights organizations were unable to fulfill their mandates because they literally could not get out of the front door. And unfortunately, to begin with, were not granted essential permits, which left not only a vacuum outside on the street, but a very dangerous precedent of where forms of repressiveness that could be expected because of the kind of deployment of a militarized reaction in the country was going to occur. And it was at this particular moment that Chapter 9 institutions like the South African Human Rights Commission sort of entered into a nodal agreement with some of civil society and extended their Section 11 mandate, which would allow monitors from organizations to, under the COVID of darkness, as it were, to go and work on the ground. I think, what I've seen is how, as a society, the fault lines of our living history, the fault lines of who we are, have really borne to the surface. If we take a look at how, almost paradoxically, the most vulnerable in our communities have been affected, but also the extent to which the most vulnerable have taken agency and advocacy for themselves in dealing with situations like this. Around the country, we've seen civil society poignantly, identifying incidents of repression and actually mobilizing a lot of support around that. But in particular in Cape Town and the Western Cape, we've seen a situation where within 72 hours, just under 2,000 homeless people were transported, many of whom forcibly removed from the CBD areas into a large camp. In that camp, we also saw a number of human rights violations in very, very disturbing ways. But what's interesting there was to see how the street-based community formed together and have actually been able to challenge power at its apex. And that as a community centered around our consciousness has really been the debate around the most vulnerable in terms of what is our responsibility as a country in protecting our most vulnerable communities.
And Tariq, I want to come in here and ask you about this awareness of rights, because as communities have lived in what is virtually a sort of a repressive system right now, where you can't smoke, you can't drink, you can't move around, and you get locked up for those kinds of violations. Do you think that repressiveness of the COVID-19 system has translated, has echoed into a greater sense of agency? Have people taken up this issue of rights, and do you think people are now more mobilized, or do you think this is in fact dispersed, this sense of agency and community? Has it increased or has it dispersed?
There's been an extraordinary development where, for example, a coalition called the COVID-19 Coalition formed similarly in style and in size of the UDF in response to the crisis. And so we've seen the formation of broad-based coalitions that are expending their resources in ways which take up a lot of human capacity and focus almost 24/7 in order to address this concern. I think that at risk is not just the fact that we have to prevent the spread of COVID, and not just the fact that in some areas we are epicenters of the spread of COVID, but what is at risk is the very fiber of who we are as South Africans in terms of how we relate to our human rights, and also the legacy with which we still hold. And I think it's the fact that is seen so directly under threat, that under these particular kinds of conditions and through these kinds of and against these constrictions, we've seen an extraordinary sense of mobility just in ways that are in conditions that are almost unnatural for people. It's not just about social distancing, but in many ways, being able to mobilize virtually and get to know people and each other and communities virtually, and almost find each other again. And so one of I think the most powerful things that has come about this crisis is a common language of what we need to protect. And that when interpretations of our constitution in as far as how C-19 is being interpreted in some places as upscaling of fascism is something that has really touched the nerve of South Africans. There's an extraordinary sense of action, of duty that's being deployed all around the country to this end.
Tariq, your summary message for us, your takeaway from the last 100 days in 30 seconds. What is your main takeaway? What have you seen on the ground? What do you walk away from at this point? What do you walk away with at this point?
I think that, we've been subjected to a number of narratives from city municipalities that want to tell us that our rights are okay. And, as we speak to each other, Lorenzo, we are witnesses of a moment where each and every second looms we move towards another reality. And it's a shared reality with the world. We've seen, what the consciousness of Black Lives Matter and that movement and how we relate to that. We've responded to evictions and demolitions and repression. We hear people like, Ayanda Kota, Collins Koza, Robin Mansomi. And I think one of the most important things is that as these deaths, these numbers begin to tick along, is for us always to remember that single one, that moment when we almost as a nation were holding and waiting and almost dreaming that one casualty was never going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's that sense of the individual and the preservation of life of an individual is very important for all of us to remember while we're dealing with these large numbers of deaths and fatalities.
I want to thank you all for Tariq, thank you for your presentation, and thank you to everybody for sharing your journeys with us and reflecting on community leadership in a post-COVID-19 world. So we do invite our audience to post some questions, and we'll ask those questions. We'll pose those questions to our panelists. But thank you very much for, I think, very wise and deep inputs into this process. So one of the questions that we have this afternoon is, what are your ideas? Some of you have been Mandela Washington Fellows, some of you have had leadership in your respective business and social agency roles. But give us an insight into what you regard now. This is June 2020. What does good leadership begin to look like for you now? When we begin to reflect on the values of good leadership in times that are now defined as the new normal, or as what I call as the far worse of old normal, what is that leadership that you now want? What do you think young people are saying of us? What are communities asking of us? What's the leadership styles? What's the leadership values that we should be carrying now that you think makes sense in a post-COVID-19 world? And I'm going to start with Salima again. I saw you dig deep there for a moment.
Yeah, it was not an easy question, but I think, and again, I'll answer from the maybe tech new startups that are being built and the leaders of those. As much as it's exciting, a lot of people are coming online, and tech adoption and tech solutions are being used to help with the COVID response and also with other new normals that we have now. I think we should also be very cautious of the implications of using tech in such personal ways. And the biggest conversation that's happening right now is the privacy and cybersecurity, and also the literacy around that. Do people even know what it means to, share their data online and become online? And you probably have heard, and I know we're not on Zoom today, but you've heard about the Zoom bombings and the people, being exposed to stuff that they really didn't want to, and knowing that a lot of students and children are now online. Government conversations are now happening online, and do we need the kind of leadership that really foresees what could go wrong in this new platforms that we aren't so much used to using in our very sensitive parts of our lives, both for work and also just for our personal lives. And the kind of leadership we need in this time is really the one that can foresee that and then tries to put together a prevention method for these things before they actually happen. So especially the tracking, and there's a lot of that. Phones are now being used to trace COVID patients or contact tracing with those, and to what extent. Maybe today we think it's the easiest solution we have and everyone has their phones, but to what extent is that going to be abusive going forward? And then how much information, how much personal data is now going to go to these players that are now trying to give responses, but in the future would really have very, very abusive and not okay, implications on everybody's personal lives and data. And so I personally would like to see a kind of leadership that foresees potential damages that the tech could have in the future, and try to prevent that already now by putting together the right policies, the right frameworks to kind of prevent those abuses before happening, because we're going into that digital world and we've never been here globally, right? So that's the kind of leadership I would like to see, one that's considerate of the future.
Tariq, do you think that our leaders have the appetite to curtail their own power now that a digitized world gives them access to such data that they've never had before? And I'm speaking of deep data here that they have access to. Do you think they're going to stop this and there's going to be some measure of accountability and they're going to go, hold on, we shouldn't be knowing these things about our citizens? Or do you think this is just an appetite for now random, unfettered power that is going to come to play in the post-COVID-19 crisis in leadership?
Well, two things. I think, Lorenzo, what we have to be very careful of is the fact that whatever the new normal is now should absolutely not be the new normal for us as civil society. And as the lockdown begins to come to a close, we need to identify those pockets where there's been an extraordinary sense of power assertion politically, and begin to unpack that, because as we've seen from around the world, when countries do go through a particular disaster and there have been restrictions that have been put in place, the living memory of those restrictions tend to be held by the authorities in order to allow them to do what they would necessarily want to do under abnormal conditions into a normal situation. I think as far as technology is concerned, in South Africa and Cape Town, we've got the Community Action Network, which I think holds a particular kind of platform where, if deployed properly, is one that takes almost a non-politicized civil group of residents together who are able to assist in communities' needs at a very localized level. And I think it's entities like these that as they grow in their own agency can also enter into a way of contesting exactly some of the concerns that you raised. I think that history will tell us that we have to be concerned. I think we need to make sure that our analysis is good, and that we hold power to account.
Yeah. And nothing has been, I think, more important post-COVID-19 than this notion that the lines of accountability now needs to be drawn with a very thick paintbrush, because it is at risk, certainly, given the amounts of power that people now have claimed for themselves. So I want to come to you, Nkosana, and you've reflected somewhat on the leadership crisis in Zimbabwe, the corruption, the access that the First Family and fellow bedfellows have in access of privilege, in terms of privilege in Zimbabwe. But I want to also introduce the second question to you, which is around, so as you reflect on leadership, also reflect for me on how do we lessen the impact of chaos? Because certainly food vulnerability, health vulnerability, housing vulnerabilities are exacerbated in a crisis like this. How do we as sense-making leaders, as professionals in our respective fields, contribute along with government, private sector, and social agencies? How does one lessen the impact of chaos on people? How do you lessen it on the mother that needs to feed her children, on a young person that's trying to build a successful future in education? How do they have less strife, less stress, and less chaos? What are some of those things that you've picked up? And I'm going to ask the other two panelists to touch on that very quickly as well. The lessening of chaos. Yes. What do we know?
What do we know is one thing that I can say is what we need currently is character-driven ethical leadership, which is derived from the core of our authenticity. That leadership that has human heart at the forefront, also which is problem solving. Once all of us understand that we've got a role to play in community development, by opening up for young people in terms of innovation and creation, then we are able to solve societal problems. Our challenge is that we think that maybe government is the only capable institution that can solve much of our societal problems, unaware that in our little spaces of influence, be it at school, be it at church, I have a role to play by opening up spaces, sharing the knowledge, and also collaborating with others. It is in the process of meeting and solving problems that life has a meaning. COVID-19 calls forth for our wisdom and courage. Ultimately, it is in the process of fighting COVID head on that we are able to realize so many vulnerabilities in our society. Hence, we are able then to share and collaborate on best practices. Remember, COVID-19 is new to us, and we young people have power in terms of social media. I'm happy in Zimbabwe, young people are using social media to expose corruption. If it wasn't for young people who are using social media to expose corruption, we wouldn't be having this COVID-19 scandal. So we are seeing a rise in terms of consciousness, in terms of young people exploring social media, and also are seeing a rise in terms of churches opening up their centers as quarantine or isolation. And we're also seeing a rise in terms of schools using their facilities in terms of coming up with sanitizers. I'm happy that one of our universities, NAST and also Headlands University, they've come up with their own ventilators, homemade ventilators. So COVID-19 has pushed boundaries. Instead of us importing, now we're able to look within, open up in terms of disruption, and also share. So COVID is both a negative and also a positive influencer in terms of where we are in Zimbabwe. In a nutshell, that's what I can say.
Okay. Tariq and Salima, just minimizing chaos. What's your ideas? How do people move out of this sensibly as a community with new resilience, new autonomy, but with minimized chaos? What's the stuff that you want to tell the communities?
Okay, I can go, I guess. I think it comes down to first understanding that we're all in this together, and so no, there's no one else who knows this better than anyone else. The whole world is facing this at the exact same time, and I don't know, or I don't remember the last time that the whole human race has been in the same place fighting the same crisis. So I think that should give everyone some kind of level of not comfort, but at least understanding of even the people we look up to, our leaders, our government officials. They probably wouldn't know the answers either. And now is not the time to really wait for an answer and blame people. I think it's really important, to seek the truth as individuals, and then to try to be more proactive and helpful than, I guess, accusational. And to make sure that whatever we know we share, and to be calm and drink water, moisturize.
Get up early, go for a walk.
I think this is here to stay. At first it was really like, okay, how are we gonna get out of this so fast and then move back to what it used to be? I don't think that's what's gonna happen. I think this crisis here is here to stay, and we should all contribute what we can and what we know to make sure that we're helping each other out. I don't think there's any big father or big brother to really lead us the way. I think this is going to be an effort globally to push things forward. But maybe I'm too optimistic. I don't know, but that's what I hope.
Well, I'm amazed at how we've adjusted just routines in the sort of lockdown period, and I almost hate myself for adjusting to it, because I don't want to get used to living like this. Tariq Jenkins, lessen the chaos for us.
Lorenzo, I have to say that this is a necessary chaos. This is one of the most important chaotic periods that we have as a species. It is the biggest opportunity for true decoloniality to actually occur. And the most important thing is to make sure that the communities around the world are in the center of the change making, to make sure that it is the narrative of the communities, the poor working class in particular, within a consciousness that the communities will define, not necessarily the authorities. Because if we do not latch onto that opportunity, then it will become an opportunity to concretize another kind of normality. The normality which is of another world. So the world has changed, And so it's up to us to determine how that change is going to happen. So there will be chaos, and it's an absolutely necessary chaos. But that chaos does belong to us. It belongs to the citizens of the world, and the citizens and communities must be in the center to determine how exactly this narrative will move forward.
That's a very profound summary of that particular question on chaos. I want to probe something with you in particular around younger persons. We speak about the Black Lives Matters movement. We speak about the power of young people in social media. But one of the observations I want to make in this process is that we often talk about those things as where young people's power reside. They reside in civic movements. They reside on social media. But how do we use that power and translate it into a sense of connectivity to the power systems that they function in? So not just on social media, not just in a protest walk down the street, or not just in a civic movement, but how do we connect young people, or begin to create the opportunities for young people to connect to the power that exists? So how do they connect to government? How do they connect to corporate life? How do they connect to the opportunities in academia? So the translation is not just that we see these amazing social media posts or these articulate blog posts and we see these amazing movements emerge. How do they get access to real power? And when I use the word real in inverted commas, because it is the systems of power that still control their lives. Do we get them into the systems of power? And how do we do that so that it's not just some nice Facebook post or blog post, but it's actually a connection to real power, to the systems of power? How do you think that happens? How does it happen for you? And any one of you can go. I know you're waiting for someone else to go first, so just tell yourself I'm going second. So you are second now. Nkosana, do you have a view on how do we connect young people to the systems of power? Because too long we celebrate that they articulate on social media, but we are not creating the systems of power that they can access.
Yes, like Tariq said, out of chaos comes a new order. While it is important to learn about the past heroes, it is our duty that we become the architects of the future that we want. And the future that we want starts today. COVID-19 has just shown us what the world can become overnight and what we need to do from the lessons that we learned. How then do we then translate post into reality? By making sure that as young people, we are continuously involved in decision making. We're continuously involved in formulation of policies. We're continuously involved in discussions like this, making sure that we explore conversations beyond Facebook posts, exploring conversation beyond the academia, going into the grassroots, going into implementation. That is where it is very much important. Disrupting the status quo. I often say that the status quo that we use, actually human beings are fond of the status quo, something that they used to, like you said, we're used to a life before COVID-19. Now our lives have been disrupted. How then do we adapt? Young people are good at coming up with ways in terms of adaptation. So we need young people forefront in decision-making, involvement at community level. Ideas, we're in the 21st century in terms of final technology. That knowledge that we have, let us translate it into feasibility studies. Let us translate it into action guides. Let us translate them into also tangibles, where communities can then say we are grateful that we have young people in our midst. Then lastly as well, this is very clear. As long as young people are not involved in active citizenship, they're not involved even in decision making in terms of contestation of power, we will never have the Africa that we want. The Africa that we want requires me and young people.
Okay, thank you. Nkosana, can you put your video back on, please? I think we lost you there for a moment. Please put your video back on if you can. Tariq and Salima, just your take on connecting young people to the systems of power. You are young, you've gone through the processes. How do young people do that? What should they be talking about now to get the access that we say is about young people in power. Salima?
Yeah,
Salam?
yes, I was just unmuting, sorry. Yeah, so I mean, it's not easy, right? Because it's always been young people are the kind of the outliers, and you're there as, you know, you're always challenging the status quo or authority, and then the moment you get access to that, somehow you also change into that thing that you were fighting for or you've been fighting against. I hope it doesn't happen like that, or I hope it doesn't continue to be like that. But I think it starts, like Nkosana also has said, that it starts from at a community level, but also being involved in scenarios like, you know, policy making and decision making areas. Like, there are opportunities to work within these authorities, institutions, or other organizations, that the ones that you really are, we are really against. We should really try to help and work together with these organizations so that the real changes would start to happen from inside out, versus that being, you know, us versus them. Like, I always say that when people complain about government or you know, systems in the country, it's, you know, if we don't like it, then we probably should be in there having these conversations, or are trying to help these guys, because maybe they don't know. Maybe genuinely they think this is the best way forward according to their kind of knowledge, based on their knowledge, and they're doing the right thing, and maybe that's it. So it's a question of, like, how, you know, also allowing ourselves to be there and to be part of these institutions. Voting, of course, if you live in any democratic, semi-democratic country, you should be able to vote. You should be able to, you know, be active in political conversations, or in any other conversation that you're, you know, wishing to change, or we wish that it would be a different way. So unless, like, protesting only is not going to be enough. Like, you have to be part of the change as well by putting yourself in those conversations, and this can only come in by finding the ways to get into there, either as an employee or as a member, or as any other way that there's access to, depending on the institution.
Thank you. Tariq, I'm going to wrap up with you. You can comment on the question on the table at the moment, but I want you just to draw in about 90 seconds, Tariq, the issue around conscientization. We have a community, we have leadership, we have young people, we have social media, we have organic grown systems within communities. Is there sufficient conscientization and awareness making of how important this period is in world history? Or are we missing the moment to actually emphasize, as you said earlier on, that this chaos is important and people should be made aware, conscientized, that this is probably one of the greatest revolutions in human history taking place right now under our noses. It's in one case, in some cases, a silent revolution, and in other cases, a very obvious revolution. How do we conscientize the emerging leadership to their roles in this new world in which we are entering?
Thanks, Lorenzo. You know, I would say it's a combination of what both my colleagues have suggested, in that it really is a combination of absolute vigilance on the outside. We often live in societies that, in order to hear an answer from authorities that are being abusive, is to take legal action. In some cases, the only way to do that is to get onto the streets. And then, of course, there is the fact that endemically and systemically, these entities need to be, evolved. The ideas of young people are the correct ideas in our present. And it's about how entire communities will commit to preserving and protecting these ideas. Because right now, it is how we take this experience of C19 and how we deploy it in the most effective ways, imaginatively, creatively, even artistically, in ways that, it will live, and it will be a part, it'll be strong enough to change our DNA, to change the DNA of societies, and in our context, it is a very strong moment for decoloniality to take place.
Thank you. I really want to thank you all for your contributions today. It's been great to have your minds in the space and to begin to understand just the kind of world that we're entering in. Thank you for your passionate contributions to the space and for your leadership roles that you play in society. To all three of you, thank you for being our panelists today. And I'm going to hand over to Belisa. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very interesting conversation. And I'd like to share a quick WhatsApp that I received from one of the audience members from Botswana saying, "Your conversation is giving me so much life, so rich with insights, exciting and resilient perspectives. I feel like calling each one of you more in depth to chat, as well as to request some project papers for the interventions that you have discussed." So this is reaching far and wide across our continent, and I'd like to just extend my thanks to Lorenzo and the three panelists for your very encouraging, uplifting and insightful conversation for the Klaus-Jürgen Bartha Leadership Program webinar today. And to sort of cap our webinar session, I'd like to also extend my thanks and support from the Nedbank side for making this possible. And I'd like to introduce Ashrini Gopi, who's going to be doing a presentation for us from the Nedbank side. And just a quick bio on her. She's the Provincial Manager of Nedbank Small Business and Professional Banking in the Western Cape with 27 years of experience in banking, mostly in credit risk and sales. She has in-depth knowledge of small business sector and is seated in building long-standing client relationships through listening to and acting on her clients' financial needs. Providing solutions is, of course, a must for her, as this forms part of the Nedbank purpose to use financial expertise to do good, so that clients can see money a little bit differently. And so I think on that note, Ash will share with us some of Nedbank's perspectives on COVID-19 and how this has changed the way Nedbank does business. Over to you, Ash.
Thank you, Belisa, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this amazing forum. I'm not going to kill you by PowerPoint. It's more conversational. I love having conversations. So I'm going to give you a little view of who we are and how do we show up as a bank during this time, and just share with you some of the ways we've had to also reinvent ourselves as a bank to manage what is happening with COVID. I certainly hope you can all see my presentation, and can you? Awesome. Trying to navigate through it, and if I can't, it worked perfect. There you go. So as Nedbank, I want to just quickly take you through our vision, and it remains the same vision during COVID-19 with the pandemic. We want to be Africa's most admired bank, and this is driven with our 5 strategic focus areas. And listening to Salam earlier, one of the things we've had to learn as a bank and reinvent ourselves with is how do we fast track digital enablement in banking during this time, when our clients, as much as we profile digital banking, they were slower at the take at this. And what we saw is to deliver innovative banking needs to our clients, it was imperative that we look at what was happening during COVID. And one of the things we quickly found out is during the first level, which was level 5, clients were very afraid to go out into the streets. They didn't want to come into the bank to do their banking, as much as there was such a great need to ensure that they had availability of funds. And we had to quickly look at the footfall in the province, and I talk about Western Cape, and had to shut down some of the branches and work digitally. And by that I mean we closed down branches where the footfall was very low to cope with the number of clients wanting to talk to us electronically. And we converted these very quickly into call centers, so we were still there for our clients, trying to deliver digitally to them. So some of the innovations was we quickly shut down branches, got our techno team to go in, create call centers during this time, and stick to the strategic focus of being there for our clients. during this time, the many relief mechanisms that government spoke about, and there were so many, the entire banking industry also had to help facilitate all of these relief mechanisms. And this also, from a strategic perspective, we had to grow our base, grow our clients even during this difficult time. And we prided ourselves in saying we grow our franchise during this time by being there for our clients. And many of the relief mechanisms was to kind of create for some of the clients better banking opportunities by opening up smaller accounts, helping them to administer funds during the relief mechanism, sticking to that. With this came a vast number of issues regarding cybercrime, and it was mentioned by all of you. Clients were a little bit cautious and not wanting to do this. So for us, our third strategic focus is being operationally excellent, and one of those is from a regulatory perspective, from a conformance perspective, from a cybercrime perspective, we ensure that our clients felt safe and we spoke to our clients during this time. The other strategic focus is how do we optimize our resources, and there was no more apparent time than this pandemic for us to see, and this comes into the people side, and Nedbank prides itself with the culture of our people within the bank and the clients that we serve. And in saying this, you know, there was such a lot of uncertainty. We were essential users. Our staff were very reluctant initially to see clients face to face, and we had to actually manage that because our clients needed them so much. And during this time, we had to quickly upskill clients that were used to face to go into the call centers and manage resources. So the people aspect is very big at Nedbank, and to develop, train, retain these staff in branches by giving them a sense of security, both from the pandemic and being able to go out and speak to our clients was really important. The last strategic focus is being top of mind in Africa, and we continue relations with our African counterparts, with Namibia and Lesotho and Zimbabwe. We have sufficient interactions via webcam to see us through COVID. So who am I and what is my approach with the small business and the professional sector? I don't need to tell you who Nedbank is. We are a green bank. And the one thing we pride ourselves in, and it is a differentiator for me, is we build enduring relationships. So from a small business and a professional space, all we pride ourselves in is you are our client, your family is our client, your staff are our client if you're a business, and the greater community is our client. And all of this is done through one single dedicated Nedbank relationship banker. So you have a one-on-one personal interaction on all of those via one person. So that is what we build on. It's a relationship of trust. We don't want you to talk to anybody but this relationship banker. And behind this is an absolutely amazing mechanism or contact management strategy focus with digital, so that we know where you are, where you were, and your history of where you were, where you are currently from a banking perspective, and where do we see you in your personal and professional space taking your banking through. So from a financial fitness perspective, you talk to one single person and it's built on enduring relationships. I don't want to go through what products. All banks have the same products, and it's not a product push, but what I would like to say during COVID is, in terms of where we are, businesses are all at different spaces. The lending that we have currently is not conducive to what it was previously. Clients that are in the space where their personal investments, their pension funds are currently at risk, that's a different space. And the third one is where the clients during this time have really effectively gone and grown their businesses. We as Nedbank during COVID have taken a stance to say, how do we retain clients that were already in distress before COVID, where because of the economy, they were already seeing signs of distress? How do we make sure we retain those clients by keeping close with our personal relationships? The ones that currently are facing during COVID, and being in the Western Cape, we know full well that the biggest impact for us in the Western Cape has been in the hospitality and the tourism space, and we do have a lot of our clients in the Western Cape affected by that. And then on the other hand, I've heard you say there are some during this time where their businesses are growing, and those industries are those that the careers, how do we make sure that they have sufficient money or sufficient viability to access funds during this time as their businesses are growing? So there are three categories: the pre-COVID, the now, and then the post-COVID. So what we're asking our clients to do is, and what we're asking our relationship bankers to do, is to keep the conversations flowing, to know where your clients are. And there is no one solution for all. The relationship of trust that you have with your banker is going to see you through this. And we will find value propositions aligned to this so that we remain first on your mind when you need access to any sort of guidance, help, support during this time. As I said, from an electronic space, as Nedbank, we've always offered this value proposition to any client wanting to open a small business. We will facilitate and open your business for you at Nedbank, do the CIPC for you, so you don't have to run around. It's an offering that we continue to offer free of charge for our clients, and we ask you to come in and do that. Our money app is now online for juristics, making it easier for juristic clients to now operate and transact online. And the third one is an opportunity where we have platforms where you as a small business client can talk to other businesses in the community, share best practices and advertise your business. So we're trying to make sure that everything that we do electronically helps you and supports you during your time with business. In terms of the COVID-19 relief measures, you would have seen the Oppenheimer 1.1 billion rand that banks were asked to facilitate, and I think this was so prevalent, and we saw all of this on television. It came at the right time, but the fund is now exhausted, so the banks have fully utilized these funds. Just to give you a sense from a Nedbank perspective, of the 1.1 billion rand, 27% of these funds came to small business in the Western Cape, with approximately 2,500 small business clients being offered this relief mechanism, and they were able to pay out to 26,000 of their staff, and this is a living wage of 750 rand just to keep them viable and open. So it was really well administered. And the one thing I can say is, just with surveys between the banks, Nedbank was seen as the bank that was there, and we had the most amount of compliments on how we administered this during the time. Currently, and what is still on, one of the mechanisms that we have is the COVID relief mechanism, and this is a term loan which is still available until the 31st of July. I have read the managing director, Bongiwe Kunene, who is of the Banking Association, has stated that due to the way this has run, and there has been kind of not the same amount of leverages as we did with the other relief mechanisms, that the date may be extended to after the 31st of July, and we're hoping we can do that, because we do believe that some of the qualifying criteria that was required, some of our businesses were not fast to get us to what was the required documents. This also came with a certain amount of mixed emotions from our business clients, and just talking to them. So what we did is we had forums with lots of our business clients to say, why are you not taking opportunities to come and take term loans? But there was a little bit of uncertainty in the market to say, I'm a bit frightened, I don't want to over indebt myself, and just to remind everybody that this mechanism or relief was mostly for the management of expenses in a business, and a lot of our businesses, so we ran forums with clients, cluster forums telephonically and via Skype, and some of the things that we picked up is clients were saying, we could manage using our own funds. They have access to the home loans where they could draw from. But what they did need funds for, which the relief program did not offer, was how do we reinvent our business so that we can sustain ourselves? And some of the things that they spoke about is a different operating model to where they are. Like restaurants wanted to do the delivery system, but they were forced to use certain deliveries only and not their own delivery mechanism. So they needed funding for that, which this doesn't allow. And we've learned from that, and I certainly hope that with government and the talks that are going through, that the banks will align to that. In terms of all of the banks, we all confirm that many small businesses are still wanting this, and in terms of liquidity, how do we make sure that cash flow becomes easy during this time? So from a Nedbank perspective, we've realigned what we can do for our clients going forward in terms of revolving credit limits, and we'll talk to clients individually on this. If you look at just, and I'd love to share this with you, so this is the view of the Western Cape and what the power of relationship is. So relationship building in small business is something that we take very seriously. And just in term, and this is the May count, I don't have the June count, you would see the numbers on your own. But just from a small business perspective, built on relationships that we have with our existing clients at Nedbank, we made sure that 19,000 interactions, and these are proactive activations that happened, 13,200 of these were proactive calls from dedicated relationship bankers to our clients. We had the highest volume of intake of loans in the country because many of our clients didn't know what was available. And the fact and the power of us talking to our clients, we were able to process the most payouts in the country as well. And I think one of the deciding factors was, yes, we are the ones with the significant impact being the epicenter. But we pride ourselves as Nedbank Small Business to stay close to our clients with our relationships. The other thing that we've quickly reinvented is we know that the health fraternity is battling during this time, and a lot of the GPs don't earn enough to sustain themselves during this time. But as the pandemic gets worse and we're going to see a rise in the number of infections, we feel there is a need for GPs to remain open to help with this during that time. And we quickly came up with and this is a Nedbank unique offering, we quickly came up with a value proposition to help GPs remain open by accessing an overdraft facility up to 200,000 at a really good rate. And we've advertised this, we've gone via SAMA and said to them, we are here for GPs, they need to talk to us. So that's one of the unique CVPs we've quickly aligned ourselves to, so to remain top of mind as Nedbank, that we are seen as people and partners during this horrible time that we're going through. Then what are we doing from a community perspective? As I said, Nedbank's culture is people driven. At the center of Nedbank is heart. And we have many, many initiatives. One of those that we have is the Nedbank Foundation. They have a whole database of what's going on, not just in the Western Cape, but in the country. But I thought it was important to highlight what we in the Western Cape are doing. And just looking and listening to everybody, the biggest thing is poverty at the moment and food. And I can safely say that we have done our bit in terms of where we are as a bank in delivering food parcels, in making sure that we are seen from a banking perspective as a bank that will see money differently during this time. And we will ensure that we are there for the people during this time. So we have distributed a total of 12,000 food parcels just in the Western Cape, and this was done via the foundation. Then I have to say that from a personal perspective, Nedbank, and this has been throughout the years, one of the things we pride ourselves in is how do we, as money experts who do good, really do good. So we have volunteer programs that staff are asked to volunteer to, and we've done that greatly. So in terms of our local heroes program, in terms of local champions, we have ensured that our staff also remain at the forefront of where the bank is, of where they physically sit. And they come to us and tell us what the plighting areas are. And we work with them to ensure that we become volunteers during this time to collate parcels, to be there for the people in a certain community. And that's something we've done really well during this time. The staff have stopped and said, we want to be part of this, and we've encouraged this to go more. So the culture of giving, of being there for people during this time is evident, not just from a seated back and a donation perspective, but also from hands-on being out there with the community for the community. In terms of adding value for small businesses, especially during this time, and I've heard it so many times, that there are so many youngsters sitting on this. What are we and who are we as Nedbank? I have to say that this is a program we run, and we've been running it for the past 3 years at small business within the country. And what we do is job losses are going to become more prevalent. We know that. And people will have to reinvent themselves. Youngsters will have to say, what am I going to do to change where I am to make a living? And we at Small Business offer a seminar, 3.5-hour free business literacy program, a workshop that invites you, and we teach you how to build a healthy relationship with the bank, how to prepare financials. Because what we've seen during this time, that people are at such different stages. A banker in Khayelitsha is battling to get financials from clients because they're not financially savvy. Clients don't know how to bank. So this program offers you free of charge a seminar to teach you that generally within the first 2 years, smaller businesses fall flat and don't operate. But we teach you the financial mechanisms to ensure that when you start a business, you know what needs to be done. We provide you with the guide to deal with business basics. We help you with planning via Simply Biz on a appropriate business plans, how to advertise. We give you backgrounds and share knowledge with other businesses to make sure that you are able to start your business and grow your business. So this is something we really pride ourselves in. And going forward, it's something I employ and invite people to come through. This can be done via webcams, and we are out there to say, during this time, let us grow our business. And if you aren't in business, let us help you do that. And we have 1 minute. Thank you, and I'm on my last slide. So for all of you on the program, and thank you for sharing, we have a solution that can come for everyone, no matter where you are. And as Nedbank, we don't want to be seen as a bank that is ignoring what's happening. We are here for you. We want to talk to you via a dedicated relationship banker. So that's me. Elisa, thank you for the opportunity, and it was really great, this invite to share with you.
Great. Thank you very much. Ashrini, I think there's a mute button that needs to be, yes, there's some feedback. Thank you very much for the session. It was very rich and very engaging. I certainly learned a lot also from a corporate perspective. It's not often that you get to hear an insider and actually to touch base with a human behind large corporates and large institutions. So thank you for that. And on that note, I think thank you to I think there were more than 53 attendees who logged in, and many more who are going to see the YouTube link that will be made available and edited after the session. I'd like to say thank you to the Klaus Jürgen Barthe Leadership Program for hosting the session, to Nedbank for supporting, to the Department of Alumni Development, as well as to the Extramural Studies Department. And last but not least, to all the panelists, including the moderator who did a fantastic job of keeping the conversation going, Lorenzo, Tariq, Salam, and Kosana from Kenya and Zimbabwe. It was truly an amazing and rich engagement. Thank you very much. With that, we'd like to close the session.